On December 21st, Archbishop Fulton Sheen was supposed to have been, I don't know if it's canonized or beatified, but named a saint, or acknowledged that he was a saint in heaven. That didn't happen. And that's because some information came forward or was revealed a few days prior to that, that Archbishop Sheen is possibly involved in the Catholic sex abuse scandal going back, I think, into the 60s, if not the 50s, I think in Rochester, New York. I don't know anything about the veracity of those claims, but knowing what I know, I would assume that those claims are most likely true. My experience tells me that everybody's dirty. And that includes the current Pope, Pope Francis. I mean, it's obvious that Pope John Paul II, Saint Pope John Paul II, was dirty. And was, what was the deal with the rush to beatify him? Well, obviously the rush to beatify Saint John Paul II was to beatify him before, to canonize him, I don't know which it is, to name him a saint before all the bad information could come out. Now, what's ironic about the case of Archbishop Sheen, who was born and bred in Peoria, Illinois, just a couple hours from here, but then kind of came to fame in New York and then ended up as the Archbishop of New York. And that's where Timothy Cardinal Dolan comes into the picture. And there's a lot of irony involved in that because of the involvement of Timothy Cardinal Dolan in my own story. And the fact that the very same claims, if not facts, of abuse and the cover-up of abuse, not primary abuse. I have no knowledge of primary abuse by Archbishop Sheen or by Timothy Cardinal Dolan, but it seems like there were acts of cover-up, if not the abuse of the abused, by Archbishop Sheen, and I have personal knowledge as a survivor going back to my days at Immacolata in St. Louis and also my days in St. Louis when the man I knew as first as Father Dolan, then as Bishop Auxiliary Bishop Dolan, was working for the Archdiocese of St. Louis, handling the case of Father LeRoy Valentine in 2002. Cardinal Dolan committed acts of abuse of the abused. Cardinal Dolan committed misdeeds. So it's fairly ironic that what seems to have happened is that Cardinal Dolan was one of the people who spiked the canonization, beatification of Archbishop Sheen when Dolan himself has incidents in his past that will cause his own rise within the Catholic Church to come to an end, if and when they are revealed. And it's my goal to reveal those secrets, to reveal what I know, not out of malice. I like Cardinal Dolan. He's a nice guy, but I've come to learn that he's also a very dangerous man because he believes that his job is to protect the church first and foremost, and that means doing whatever it takes to cover up the acts of abusers. And that started with Father LeRoy Valentine at Immacolata and has continued during his days in Milwaukee and now in New York. Cardinal Dolan and the other bishops who think that their job still continues to be to protect the church over helping survivors, regardless of whether you like them personally, regardless of whether they are good people personally, they cannot be allowed to remain in power because they, well, if they're allowed to remain in power, they will mark and ensure the end of the Catholic Church. Because their method is to abuse the abused, to terrorize survivors, best case to gaslight survivors. And I know that all too well because of my own dealings with Timothy Cardinal Dolan that go back to St. Louis and the Church of the Immacolata. And this is the late 70s. So I was abused by Father LeRoy Valentine at the Church of the Immacolata from probably fall of 1977 until at least late December 1980, if not into 1981. Timothy Cardinal Dolan was at Immacolata for much of that time. He came to Immacolata straight out of the seminary in May, June 76, ended up leaving in May, June of 79. So he and Valentine overlapped for some number of years. My first memory of a priest is of Dolan, and this is probably fall of 76, when Dolan came to our third grade class to give us to teach us. We were having a religion class, and it was third grade, and every now and then the priest would come over and talk about we went to mass every single day. This was old school. And sometimes the priest would come over and talk to us about what we learned from the homily of the day. And the gospel was Mark 8:22-26, where Jesus heals the blind man at Bethesda. I don't know if that's Bethesda or a different place. All the names are the same. But he has to do it in 2 steps, which we interpreted as being a mistake, but I know some people have a problem with that interpretation. But so we'll just say Jesus did it in 2 steps. And I remember that because then Father Dolan chose me to play the role of Jesus Christ, which is a big deal. So that's my memory of Father Timothy Dolan. I didn't really know him that well because, in the fall of 76, I would have been in third grade. You didn't really get to know the priest that well unless you were a server, and in Immacolata, you didn't really start serving. You didn't start serving until you were in 5th grade, so there would have been probably a 1-year period in 79 when I would have had the opportunity to serve for Father Dolan. 77 and 78, I wouldn't have seen him much other than kind of around. And even in 79, I probably wouldn't have served for him that much because he was kind of a big deal. And if you were a rookie server, just a 5th grader, you were going to get the less senior priest, Father Valentine. It was obvious that Father Dolan was being groomed for something and was kind of a big deal. He was special. So he and Monsignor Flavin, when they were doing their masses, they would get the older, more experienced boys, and the younger, less experienced boys would serve the masses for Father Valentine. I didn't really understand it at the time, but that's how it worked. So by the time I got older, 6th, 7th grade, Father Dolan had moved on to his studies, and that was 79 or so, and that's when things got worse with Father Valentine. But the thing is that from 77 to 79, Father Valentine was doing things to us in the rectory. And it started with parties. I thought that I was special, and Valentine was really good at this, at making you feel special, thinking that you were getting singled out. But it seems like Valentine was having parties at least every weekend, if not every night of every weekend, and having boys over. He had kind of a progression of boys coming through the rectory. And I know that Father Dolan knew of some of that. He knew that Father Valentine was having boys over, that he would have boys over for parties. We would play Risk with Father Valentine and have pizza parties and drink Coke, real Coke, not Bess or RC Cola, and we would get a whole can rather than a half a can or a third of a can. We wouldn't have to split it with anyone, which is a big deal. But Father Dolan was around. Now, he was around more at the beginning than at the end, but I think that wasn't because of his duties, but I think it was more because he just kind of disappeared and he didn't want to know. But he lived in the same rectory as Father Valentine. And Valentine would take boys up to his room. I went up to Valentine's room at least once. And I remember so when I came forward in 2018, late April 2018, I told my story in the Post-Dispatch. And later on that day, I got a direct message via Twitter from a guy telling me a story about something that had happened to him at Immacolata. And I had a very similar story and a very similar memory. I've always had a thing about my hair. I don't remember whether it had to do with haircuts exactly, but I do have lots of memories involving Father Valentine playing with my hair and being obsessed with my hair. And I remember, what Valentine would do pretty much always was he would have one hand in my hair, playing with my hair. And he would have another hand down there. I don't remember whether he used the guise of haircuts or not. Wouldn't surprise me if he did. I remember there's one incident that I call special training, or that I've labeled special training, that happened that way, where I was in the back of the sacristy, the priest side of the sacristy, with Valentine refilling hosts. And Valentine started off with one hand playing with my hair, and then the other hand down there. And there was a similar episode that happened up in the rectory. Sitting on Valentine's bed. And Valentine never really made an attempt to hide this. But he would have me sit on the bed and sit next to me and like hug me, and he would have one hand in my hair and he would have another hand like on my lap or on my knee, or and Father Dolan would be around when that stuff was going on, and he would see it. In one of the And I have a sense of the look that crossed Dolan's face, that he didn't like it. He didn't like what he was seeing. He had a weird look on his face. But the reason I didn't get more upset or more freaked out about what was going on with Valentine and to this day, I have problems with my bed and, where I sleep, and I just have problems related to that are all flashbacks and feelbacks to that incident. I don't really want to go into the details related to that, but it's all just reenactments of that scene. Him touching me and my touching myself, trying to recreate those feelings. And shame and pleasure and all this stuff all intertwined, which basically has ruined sex for me. But the reason I didn't get freaked out by what one of the reasons why I didn't get freaked out by what Father Valentine was doing to me, and I couldn't have done anything because Valentine was a huge guy. He had these massive hands. I couldn't have done anything. But one of the reasons I didn't get freaked out was because of Dolan's reaction. While his face was weird, he didn't do anything about it. And the fact that Dolan didn't do anything told me that this wasn't as big of a deal, that it wasn't a big deal and that it wasn't scary. So one of the things you learn as a parent is your kids will look to you to understand whether something is scary. And if something, if they fall down, you can kind of guide their reaction to that. If you overreact to their falling down, they will overreact to it. If you don't overreact to it, they'll be like, okay, that wasn't fun, but, it's not the end of the world. And that's one of the things I learned with my kids. And, our kids are relatively tough because we learned to not overreact to stuff. We would give them a hug and give them a kiss, and then they would kind of move on. And it was kind of funny because they would just move on to stuff, whereas other kids would draw things out for a half an hour. And I think what I was doing that time was I was looking to Father Dolan for guidance about how to feel about what was happening, what Father Valentine was doing to me. And Father Dolan's reaction was, it's not a big deal. But that's what the word I've used with the Archdiocese is ambivalent because, when I tried to get help from the Archdiocese, the word I used was ambivalent because on the one hand, my body is screaming, this is really weird. I need to get out of here, but Father Dolan, but it's Father Valentine, and he's like the nicest guy in the world, and Father Dolan sees all this stuff, and he's not reacting to it. He doesn't seem to think it's a big deal. So, and Monsignor Flavin's around, and he doesn't seem to think it's a big deal, and nobody's doing anything about it. So obviously, this isn't a big deal. So that's how it happened. And this is 77 to 79. In the rectory at Immacolata, the Church of the Immacolata, Richmond Heights, Missouri, which is a suburb of St. Louis, right up the hill from the Galleria, just a little west of downtown. So then in 2002, a piece ran in the New York Times. That got picked up, the story got picked up by the local papers. And the circuit attorney, Jennifer Joyce, and the Archdiocese of St. Louis, Dolan by that time was an auxiliary bishop, basically the vicar for priests, I believe. So this is early March 2002. Jennifer Joyce and the Archdiocese both said, hey, so this article ran about Valentine and how he had abused these three brothers in the early 80s. If anybody knew anything about Valentine or had any information about Valentine, could they please call the circuit attorney and the Archdiocese? So I called the circuit attorney's office, told them 4 or 5 memories. Stuff that I didn't really put together as being bad at the time. I didn't remember, or I didn't understand the worst stuff at the time. I remembered it, but I didn't understand it. Or I didn't remember all the worst stuff, but I remembered a lot of stuff, but not the worst stuff. But what I remembered, I didn't understand. But there was regardless of whether it made sense or not, there was a statute of limitations problem. So the circuit attorney, Jennifer Joyce, couldn't do anything about it. I believe a number of other people called in, but I assume, and I've actually heard they convened a grand jury, but I think the whole problem with my information, as with everyone, was that there were statute of limitations problems and nobody could do anything. So after making the call to the circuit attorney's office, I also called the Archdiocese hotline. And the next day, I got a call back from then Auxiliary Bishop Timothy Dolan, now Cardinal Dolan. Hey Chris, Tim Dolan, Bishop Dolan. Been a long time, how you doing? It upsets me. It upsets me because he played me. He was using our familiarity against me. But so I then, Dolan wanted to know what was up, and I'm like, you read this stuff about Father Valentine? This is crazy, Do you think there's anything to what they're saying? Is this, I've got these memories, and one of them is kind of weird, and I told Bishop Dolan, again, the same 4 or 5 memories that I told the circuit attorney. Like, I remember this and this last one's a little weird, but there's nothing definitive about it. Do you believe what they're saying about him? Do you think any of these memories mean anything? And Dolan tells me without any investigation or any hesitation, and this is just burned in my brain. I've known LeRoy Valentine forever, for years. We were in the seminary together. We lived and worked together at Immacolata. I know that LeRoy Valentine didn't do any of the things that he's accused of. I know he couldn't do anything to hurt a child. Slam dunk, no, hard no. No, and remember, this is without any investigation. I just told him a set of memories. Dolan didn't do any investigation of it. He just immediately told me, no, it doesn't mean anything, nothing happened. But then Dolan did say, but if you do want to talk to someone, we have a psychologist that we work with, or that I have a psychologist that we know who is knowledgeable about this stuff. I can set up an appointment with her if you'd like to talk to her. And I took him up on that for whatever reason. I can't actually explain why I took him up on that offer. But so I met with her. I don't remember exactly who that is, but I suspect that it's Nancy Brown. She was the assistance coordinator for the Archdiocese of St. Louis. Dolan sold her as being an independent person, but she was actually the assistance coordinator for the Archdiocese of St. Louis. And now here's where things get weird and where I start to get pissed. And this is where the cover-up starts. I didn't know this until recently. But at the same time, two other people came forward to Dolan. One in early March 2002 with an allegation against Father Valentine. And I actually happened to find their allegation thanks to the Google. Basically, I was doing keyword searches, searching for Dolan, Valentine, abuse, and I ended up finding this document in a book about abuse and cases of abuse in the Archdiocese of St. Louis. But what's crazy is that this document, which related to a call that Dolan took related to Father LeRoy Valentine, was found in the file of a completely unrelated abuser. And actually, thank God, it was misfiled or lost, because that was the only way I was able to find it, because the document ended up being given to the sister of that abuser, and she ended up writing the book. And then it's kind of random. It doesn't really pertain to her brother's case, but she ended up writing about it, I guess, to just talk about how things are done and how other cases are handled. But so she ended up writing about that document in her book, and that allowed me to be able to, so then Google scanned the book, and that allowed me to find it. Yay, Google. Thank you, Google. Thank you, Google. Because that was a major find, because then that proves that Dolan, at the time that I say called in early March 2002, was handling calls related to the Father LeRoy Valentine affair. And he took at least one other call related to Father Valentine. I don't know who that person is who called in. I don't know the disposition of that call. I just know that I can prove that Dolan was taking those calls, and I believe I can prove that the Archdiocese committed perjury related to that call, as well as mine. I'll get to that in a little bit, related to something called the Matrix. So as it turned out, in early March 2002, I called in to the Archdiocese of St. Louis. This other guy, related to this memo, called in. So that's two of us, and it turns out there was a third guy, and I found this out about a year ago. There was a third guy who called in at the end of March 2002. The reason it took him a while to call in was that he was living in California, and it took a little while for the information to filter out to him. basically his girlfriend or his ex-girlfriend had to read the piece and connect the dots. Hey, didn't you talk about Valentine at some point and how you had some issue with him? So she called him, and then he read the piece, and then he actually came back at the Archdiocese and came straight back at Dolan and basically scared the crap out of Dolan, because he came back to Dolan explicitly making the connection between Dolan and Valentine. And I know this because he told me as much in a Facebook message that he sent me roughly a year ago when we connected, where he just kind of laid out everything that happened relative to his case. So now I've got 3 guys who came forward in March 2002 with complaints against Father Valentine, and a second guy who came forward in early March 2002, a third guy in total who could make the connection between Dolan seeing Valentine abusing guys, or abusing them at least to some level, sexual exploitation, perhaps abuse, if not abuse, and Dolan not doing anything about it. Or at a minimum, maybe Dolan did something. Maybe he went to Monsignor Flavin, but I'll tell you this, nothing changed. And that's what frustrates me about the first guy that I referenced, the direct message that I got via Twitter. What frustrates me is he was 2 or 3 years older than me, and if Dolan had, this is the Sandusky thing and the McQueary thing. Basically the Sandusky thing was McQueary went to Sandusky, McQueary went to Paterno. And if Paterno had seen through and ridden hard on the Sandusky thing, what McQueary saw, then Sandusky would have been stopped some number of years earlier than he actually was. But instead, Sandusky had another several years to abuse guys, and more guys got. And that's exactly what happened at Immacolata. Because Dolan didn't do anything. Well, he didn't do anything that made a difference. He didn't go to the cops. Maybe he went to Monsignor Flavin, and Flavin told him to shut up, but, what kind of a man takes shut up for an answer? No human being takes, shut up for an answer. Only a coward takes shut up for an answer. And I just called Timothy Cardinal Dolan a coward, because that's what he is. He's a coward. He's a pathetic coward. Only a coward possesses information about the sexual exploitation, if not the sexual abuse of children, and doesn't do anything about it. And that's what Timothy Cardinal Dolan did and did not do. So in early March 2002, you've got 3 guys. Dolan's got 3 guys who have come to him. Me, the memo from the book guy, and then this third guy who contacted me via Facebook. I don't know whether the other guy who DM'd me via Twitter came forward or not. He hasn't gotten back to me. So theoretically, if he did come forward in 2002, that's the 4th guy. But I know Dolan as of the end of March, as of late March 2002, had 3 complaints against Valentine. Well, and first, so Dolan with 2 allegations against Valentine, mine and the guy with the memo from the book, Dolan still wasn't going to do anything against Valentine. It wasn't until the 3rd guy came in at the end of March 2002, guy I know, I've talked to him multiple times. He's unfortunately a mess, has some real problems. So I'm having trouble getting corroboration from him. Abuse really messes you up, and that's just how it is. So this 3rd guy comes in, tells Dolan that he knows that Dolan saw at least some of what Valentine was doing to guys. It's only then that Valentine resigned at the end of March of 2002. I think he resigned the 27th or I think he resigned on the 27th. It was picked up in the papers on the 28th. Valentine resigned. I assume Valentine was asked to resign by Dolan. But here's the thing. For whatever reason, I missed Valentine's resignation. I must have been traveling or something. I've done a lot of consulting. So I missed that. And then Auxiliary Bishop, now Cardinal Timothy Dolan, never circled back to me at the end of March 2002 after Father LeRoy Valentine resigned. Bishop Dolan, Cardinal Dolan, never circled back to me to say, hey, Chris, you know how I said that stuff with Valentine didn't mean anything, that nothing happened? Well, Valentine just resigned, so, maybe it does mean something, so maybe we should talk. Dolan never did that. He just let me in the, He just let me spin in the wind. Dolan just let me spin in the wind. And this bothers me so much because I think about my whole life and how that in 2002 is an inflection point. If Dolan had done something then, my life would be significantly different because I would have been able to get help. Only now in 2000, at the very end of 2019, am I starting to get help, EMDR and that kind of stuff that really seems to be making a difference. I could have been dealing with this stuff in 2002 rather than 2019. I could still have a family. I could still have a marriage. I could still have a house. I could still have a life. Instead of having lost everything. And again, the reason I'm doing this isn't out of spite against Dolan. I'm doing this because Dolan cannot be trusted to protect children. Dolan has demonstrated over and over again that he cannot be trusted to protect children. His first loyalty is to the church rather than to children, as he proved over and over again at Immacolata. And he needs to be taken out of a position of power where he can continue to shuffle and protect abusers. Send him off to Rome to some stupid BS ceremonial thing where he doesn't have any authority over abusers. Let him be a theologian or a proselytizer or something. But Dolan should never be in any position of authority over people who could possibly abuse children, because Dolan can't be trusted with a responsibility. Simple as that. So I was actually okay for a couple of years, and then my older son made his first confession. In February 2003, I had a panic attack. My older daughter made her first confession, I think, again, that was February 2005. I had a panic attack. I didn't connect it to Valentine because Dolan had told me nothing happened. 2007, I had become what, in the words of my co-workers, I didn't find this out until the last couple of years or so, but they said I had become catatonic. Would have been nice for someone to tell me that at the time and help me, thanks to Equifax, rather than just laying me off. But so they described me as having become catatonic. So right before the 4th of July, right around the anniversary of the worst day, Equifax laid me off. That was basically the last steady job I've had because I got sick, psychologically sick, mentally ill, anxiety, depression, PTSD, complex PTSD, that kind of stuff. I've talked about some of it. Other stuff I won't talk about because it's just bad and I don't want to scare people. But it's bad. So by 2011, I had lost everything. I was sick. I was obviously having a nervous breakdown. And I'd seen a psychologist, and remember, so Dolan in 2002, in early March 2002, Dolan told me that nothing had happened between Valentine and me. So from 2002 to 2011, when I was getting sick, I knew I had a problem and I was looking for solutions, but I knew not to look at sexual abuse or anything related to that because Dolan told me nothing happened. Dolan gave me a clean bill of health on sexual abuse. So I looked at all this other stuff, Asperger's syndrome and ADHD, adult ADHD, all this stuff. Basically, Dolan sent me on a 10-year wild goose chase in 2002. And by May 2011, I'd run out of alternate explanations. I'd been seeing a therapist and I'd started talking about Immacolata and wondering about Immacolata and Valentine. And so I went back to the Archdiocese in May 2011 with the intention of just asking him, are you sure? Are you sure this stuff that I told Dolan in 2002 doesn't mean anything? And they told me, what do you mean the stuff you told Dolan? We have no record of you're having any conversations with Dolan in 2002. Fuck. So I ended up telling him the whole story, telling him everything that I had told Dolan, and I'd remembered a little bit of stuff, additional stuff since. Wrestling, that kind of stuff. Valentine and teaching us wrestling and inappropriate touching with his hands accidentally slipping, that kind of stuff. But then I circled back to the whole, are you sure you've got no record of my conversations with Dolan in 2002? Because this is where we get into gaslighting, and I'm like, I'm sure I talked to Dolan because I remember where I was standing, and I can remember going to Nancy Brown's office. And actually after that meeting with the Archdiocese of St. Louis review team in May 2011, I actually drove to downtown Clayton and tried to drive around to find that office. I couldn't find it. I drove past the place where I met her like 100 times and literally couldn't see the building, even though I drove past it like 100 times. But so I talked to the review team, and I'm like, what do you mean you don't have any record of my conversations with him? I talked to Dolan 2 or 3 times. You know, I had this initial conversation, and then we had conversations talking about setting up this appointment with Nancy Brown, and I talked to Nancy Brown, and she told me nothing happened and that I was just misinterpreting stuff. You don't have any records of that? And they're like, no, we don't have any record of that. So somebody ended up deleting or hiding all those records of the conversations that I had with Dolan and with Nancy Brown in early and mid-March 2002. I don't know who that was, but presumably it was Dolan or someone trying to protect him. And I actually have proof of this in the form of a tweet from Bishop Rick Sticka, who took over from Bishop Dolan as the vicar for priests of the Archdiocese of St. Louis. Basically Dolan left that role pretty much immediately after March 2002, and then Sticca took over, and as of the summer of 2002, Sticca had been in Valentine's file and could confirm that there was no information related to my case or my conversation with Dolan or Nancy Brown in the file of Father LeRoy Valentine as of the summer of 2002. So obviously someone's working really hard to insulate Bishop Dolan from the abuse scandal. You know, every conversation that he has with me in particular, and then with other survivors, it either is trashed or disappeared, or in the case of the memo that ended up in the book, it ends up in the file of a completely unrelated predator. Something funny's going on. Someone's playing games. Either Dolan's doing this himself or someone's doing it trying to protect Dolan. And the last and best piece of evidence that I have for this, for these efforts to protect now Cardinal Timothy Dolan, is what's known as the Matrix. So the Archdiocese of St. Louis gets sued every year or so by survivors. As of January 2014, they were involved in litigation, and under court order in January 2014, the Archdiocese of St. Louis was ordered to produce a matrix, basically a spreadsheet, of allegations received during a certain time period against abusers. The matrix was anonymous, but I was able to, because of some special circumstances related to the 2002 case that originally blew things up, I was able to determine who Father Valentine was, which accused individual he was. I was able to find him in the matrix. And this is another episode of gaslighting. Something that really, really messed me up. So the Matrix comes out, and this is on the heels. So the Matrix comes out in January 2014. I look at it eagerly, and I'm completely freaked out and stunned because I'm not in the Matrix. Fuck. So in 2011, I go to them, and they tell me they've got no record of my conversations with Dolan and Nancy Brown. So I tell them. And then in 2014, the Matrix comes out, and I've told them in 2011 about my 2002 conversations with Dolan and Nancy Brown. So, okay, they disappeared somehow. They got lost. But as of early May 2011, the Archdiocese of St. Louis knew about my conversations with Cardinal Dolan and Nancy Brown, and they still didn't make it into the Matrix in January 2014. And now we're talking about a cover-up, and we're talking about perjury, and we may even be talking about obstruction of justice. And this is gaslighting for me because, you know, how many times does the Archdiocese have to act like I don't exist? And again, and this is on the heels of May 2013, when the Archdiocese of St. Louis permanently removed my abuser, Father LeRoy Valentine, after 2 years of my trying to get help from May 2011 to May 2013, trying to get help and working with Deacon Phil Hengen and trying to go through their whole process. And in May 2013, the Archdiocese permanently removes Father Valentine and never warns me about it, much less helps me. And they don't even act like they don't act like I exist. So that's really, twice in kind of rapid succession within 8 months or so. In May 2013, and then again in January 2014, the Archdiocese of St. Louis has twice publicly denied my existence to the people of St. Louis. What the hell is going on? The only thing I can think is that they're trying to, either they're trying to gaslight me or there's something bigger going on. And I eventually realized that I shouldn't be taking this personally. I should be figuring out what the motive is. And it turns out what they're trying to do is they're trying to protect Cardinal Dolan, because they view him as being popeable, as being someone who could be nominated for the next pope, the Archdiocese of St. Louis. Because imagine the feather in the cap of the Archdiocese of having the first American pope being from St. Louis. Now, most people who know how things work think that's an impossibility, that Dolan lost his chance with his misdeeds in Milwaukee, but I think there's still people in St. Louis who think that's still a chance. But so it seems like what's going on is a systematic effort to hide the misdeeds of Cardinal Dolan, to cover up everything that he did. And part of that involves never naming me, both in May 2013 and then again in January 2014. And why would they do that? They would do that because to name me and Valentine and my dates of 77 to 79 would tie Dolan and Valentine and me together, and that would tie Dolan and Valentine, a known abuser, together, and make plausible all these stories about about Dolan knowing about Valentine and not doing anything about it. And if you look at the matrix that was released in January 2014, you'll notice that most of the dates, and they do acknowledge abuse, or they acknowledge substantiated claims. They acknowledge, I think, one substantiated claims, and then 3 where they made a settlement, then 1 unsubstantiated claim. The unsubstantiated claim is from 73, 74, I think. And then there are 4 either substantiated or made settlement claims. Those are from the 80s. But remember, my claim is 77 to 79. I don't know the claim of the second guy, the memo from the book guy. I don't know the dates of his abuse. But I do know that the third guy from late March 2002, his abuse would have been the same time frame as mine, late 77. So neither my claim nor his claim, or neither my allegation nor his allegation is in the matrix, which is perjury. Why would they do that? Why would the Archdiocese of St. Louis risk perjury? And the answer is to protect Cardinal Dolan. The Archdiocese of St. Louis will admit that Father LeRoy Valentine is a bad guy. But what they want you to believe is that Father Valentine didn't start abusing until 1982 or 1983. They don't want people to know about Immacolata. which is why they never talk about me, which is why they're running a smear campaign against me, which is why they won't end that smear campaign. There's actually another Immacolata guy I know that who's talked to the Archdiocese and they blew him off. I don't know much about his story, but he's contacted me. But so anyone who has a story that can connect Cardinal Dolan, Immacolata, and Father LeRoy Valentine, they are disregarded and just kind of ignored, disappeared by the Archdiocese of St. Louis, because to acknowledge them would be to leave Dolan vulnerable to allegations that he turned a blind eye to the abuse of children at Immacolata, which in fact he did. Timothy Cardinal Dolan, the Archbishop of New York, while he was at Immacolata in Richmond Heights, Missouri, a suburb of St. Louis, in the late 70s, 77 to 79, saw at least the sexual exploitation of children, if not the sexual abuse of children by Father LeRoy Valentine, and turned a blind eye to it. Nothing changed in our treatment by Father LeRoy Valentine. Timothy Cardinal Dolan, he saw it, he knew it, nothing changed. And my sense is that rather than doing something, rather than going to the police or whatever, rather than raising a ruckus, then Father Dolan, now Timothy Cardinal Dolan, just kind of checked out and he just turned a blind eye to it and just kind of disappeared and just let it happen. He didn't want to see, he didn't want to know. He went, Sergeant Schultz, I see nothing, I hear nothing. That's Timothy Cardinal Dolan for you.